Late one stormy night, in a small, secluded village nestled between ancient forests, there lived an old woman named Elara. She was known throughout the village for her vast knowledge of herbs and remedies, but whispers also spread that she possessed a dark, hidden power, one that could call upon the spirits of the dead. The villagers respected her, but they also kept their distance, unsure whether her knowledge was a gift or a curse. One evening, as the rain pounded against the windows and the wind howled like a pack of wolves, a young man named Tomas knocked on Elara's door. Tomas was desperate. His sister, Lydia, had fallen gravely ill, and no doctor in the nearby towns could diagnose her ailment. The illness had come upon her suddenly. One day she was vibrant and full of life, and the next she was bedridden, her skin cold and pale, her breath shallow. Elara opened the door slowly, her wrinkled face framed by the dim light of a single candle. Her eyes, sharp and piercing despite her age, took in Tomas's anxious face. "You seek help," she said, her voice raspy but firm. "But are you prepared to pay the price?" Tomas hesitated, but only for a moment. "I'll do anything," he replied, his voice trembling. "Please, just save my sister." Elara nodded, her expression unreadable. She beckoned Tomas inside, and as he stepped over the threshold, he felt a chill run down his spine, a sensation that seemed to come not from the cold, but from something deeper, something unseen. The inside of Elara's cottage was as mysterious as the woman herself. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars of strange powders, dried herbs, and ancient tomes. A cauldron simmered in the hearth, releasing a fragrant, earthy aroma that mixed with the scent of burning wood. In the corner, an old, tattered chair sat beside a small table, on which lay a deck of worn tarot cards. Elara led Tomas to the table and motioned for him to sit. She took the seat opposite him and began to shuffle the cards, her bony fingers moving with surprising dexterity. "Your sister's illness," Elara said, as she laid the first card on the table, "is not of this world. It is a curse, placed upon her by a spirit wrong, seeking vengeance." Tomas's heart sank. "A curse? But why? We have done nothing to anger any spirit." Elara's eyes narrowed as she placed another card on the table. "Not all spirits are angered by actions taken in this life. Some carry their grudges from the past, from long before you were born. This spirit," she continued, revealing another card, "was once a woman who lived in this village many years ago. She was betrayed, abandoned by the man she loved, and left to die alone in the forest. Her soul, unable to find peace, now wanders the earth, seeking revenge on those who remind her of her lost love." Tomas stared at the cards, his mind racing. But why Lydia? What did she do to deserve this? Elara looked up, her gaze intense. "Your sister bears a striking resemblance to the woman who was wronged. The spirit sees her as a reflection of her own pain and seeks to inflict the same suffering upon her." Tomas felt a wave of guilt wash over him. His sister had always been kind and gentle, never deserving of such a fate. "Please," he begged, "tell me how to break the curse." Elara was silent for a moment. Then she stood and walked over to one of the shelves. She returned with a small, ornate box and placed it on the table. "Inside this box," she said, "is an amulet, a powerful talisman that can protect against the wrath of spirits. But it will not be enough to simply give it to your sister. You must perform a ritual to bind the amulet's power to her soul, and for that, you will need to face the spirit directly." Tomas's blood ran cold at the thought of confronting the vengeful spirit, but he knew he had no choice. "What must I do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elara opened the box, revealing a silver amulet etched with intricate symbols. She handed it to Tomas and began to explain the ritual. "You must go to the forest where the spirit resides. There you will find an old oak tree, ancient and gnarled, with roots that twist like the fingers of the dead. Beneath this tree lies the spirit's grave. You must place the amulet on the grave and recite the incantation I will teach you. If you do this correctly, the spirit will be bound to the earth, and your sister will be free." Tomas swallowed hard, fear gripping his heart. "And if I fail?" Elara's gaze darkened. "If you fail, the spirit will not only claim your sister, but it will also come for you. It will not stop until it has exacted its revenge." The weight of her words settled heavily on Tomas, but he steeled himself. He had no other option. He took the amulet and the instructions Elara gave him and prepared to leave. "One more thing," Elara said, her voice grave. "The spirit will try to deceive you, to lead you astray. You must not listen to it, no matter what it says. Stay true to your purpose, and you may yet save your sister." With that, Tomas left the cottage and made his way into the forest. The storm had subsided, but the night was still dark, with only the occasional flash of lightning illuminating the path ahead. The trees loomed overhead, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. As Tomas ventured deeper into the forest, the air grew colder, and a sense of unease settled over him. He could feel the presence of something watching him, something ancient and malevolent. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it faint, ghostly voices, cries of sorrow, of anger, of despair. After what felt like hours of walking, Tomas finally reached the old oak tree. It was exactly as Elara had described, twisted and gnarled, with roots that seemed to writhe beneath the earth. The ground around the tree was barren, devoid of any grass or flowers, as if the very life had been sucked out of the soil. Trembling, Tomas approached the tree and knelt beside the grave. He placed the amulet on the ground and took out the piece of parchment where Elara had written the incantation. As he began to read the words aloud, the wind suddenly picked up, swirling around him in a frenzy. The temperature dropped sharply, and Tomas could see his breath fogging in the air. And then he heard a voice, soft and mournful, calling his name. "Tomas. Hey, Tomas." He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The voice was that of a woman, filled with sorrow and pain. "Tomas, please, help me." He clenched his fists, remembering Elara's warning. The spirit was trying to deceive him, to draw him away from his task. He forced himself to continue reading the incantation, his voice trembling but determined. "Tomas, why do you hurt me so?" the voice wailed, now filled with anguish. "I only want to be free." The ground beneath him began to tremble, and the tree's roots seemed to writhe and twist even more violently. Tomas struggled to keep his focus, his voice rising above the howling wind. "Tomas, please. I'm so cold. So alone." For a moment, his resolve wavered. What if the spirit truly was in pain? What if there was another way to help it, without causing it further suffering? But then he remembered Lydia, pale and fragile, lying on her bed, fighting for every breath. He couldn't let the spirit take her. He had to finish what he had started. With renewed determination, Tomas recited the final words of the incantation. As he did, the wind reached a deafening roar, and the ground shook violently. The spirit's voice rose in a shriek of fury and despair, and for a moment, Tomas thought the earth itself would swallow him whole. But then, as suddenly as it had begun, the storm ceased. The wind died down, and the forest fell silent. The amulet on the ground glowed with a soft, ethereal light, then slowly faded, its power now bound to the earth. Tomas let out a shaky breath, relief washing over him. He had done it. The spirit was bound, and Lydia was safe. Exhausted but filled with hope, he made his way back to the village. When he arrived at his sister's bedside, he found her awake, her color returned, her breathing steady. Tears of joy filled his eyes as he embraced her, thankful beyond words. But as the days passed, Tomas couldn't shake the feeling that something was still amiss. Though Lydia had recovered, strange things began to happen in the village. People reported hearing whispers in the night, seeing shadowy figures in the corners of their eyes. The animals grew restless, and the crops began to wither. One night, as Tomas lay in bed, he heard a faint voice one he had hoped never to hear again. "Tomas." And his blood ran cold. The spirit had not been banished, it had only been angered, and now its wrath was not just his to bear, but the entire village's. Realizing the grave mistake he had made, Tomas knew he had to confront the spirit once more. But this time, he would not seek to bind it. He would seek to understand it, to make amends, and to help it find peace, so that it might finally rest and leave the living in peace as well. The true horror of the tale lay not in the spirit's vengeance, but in the realization that sometimes the past cannot be simply bound and forgotten. It must be faced, understood, and laid to rest not through force, but through compassion and understanding. As Tomas ventured back into the forest one last time, he carried with him not just the amulet, but also a heart filled with empathy and a desire to right the wrongs of the past so that both the living and the dead might find peace.